So I got, actually this morning, a lot of people walking past and saying, wow, I appreciated you on that panel yesterday. You added a lot of levity, and strap in because this is a very serious talk with no jokes. That's not true. Cool, I'm gonna be talking about cross-cultural differences and how to include all of your users. Thank you, that introduction covered almost everything I need to say, but also I want to note for you that in addition to being the accessibility lead at Click, I'm also a co-organizer of Chicago's Digital Accessibility and Inclusive Design Meetup, which is one of the largest accessibility meetups internationally. We're huge, we're well regarded. So I like to think I know a thing or two about how to include people. Now, I'm not a payments engineer, but that's not what I'm here to be an expert about for you all today. Also, if you're a person who likes live tweeting, you're my new best friend. My Twitter handle is over there, Sublime March. If you live tweet me, I'll give you a high five. Hooray. Okay, cool. So let's dive right in. We got a half hour. So first I want to talk about the concept of localization. This is a word I think we've heard a lot so far at this conference. It's the process through which a product is designed to appeal to a specific culture. And really, that's more or less what this talk is going to be about, although in some directions we don't usually think about localization. I have an excellent quote here for you from a great book called International User Interfaces. It's no longer enough to simply offer a product translated in 10 to 20 different languages. Users also want a product that acknowledges their unique cultural characteristics and business practices. I'm sure I'm not the only one in this room that has just added on another language to a website and gone, cool, now people will understand it, now they can use it, it's fine, it's in Spanish now, we're done, right? No, we're not done. According to Diane Sear and Hazley Trevor-Smith, who are two awesome sociologists, cultural differences impact a lot in the digital space. More than just, can I read what you're saying, right? It impacts e-commerce trust. Looking at an e-commerce website and feeling, do I trust these people to give them my money? The way that trust is built varies widely across cultures. Also marketing, as I'm sure we can assume, not only linguistically, but also the words we choose and the way we choose them, which we'll talk about more in a little bit. Also technology adoption. We talked on that excellent panel yesterday about different payment methods, different devices, things like that. Also just generally information, communication, a lot. And there's a lot more we're going to get into. But the business impact of localization is really high. I have lots of wonderful stats for you, but this is only a half-hour talk, so we don't have much time. But generally, there are significant studies that have shown, and I'm sure a lot of us in our own work have known, the huge impact that properly localizing a site can have. So really, what I want to be talking about today is more than just this concept of localization that we often think about when we're working in global markets, and instead talk more about inclusion and how that applies to localization. Generally, for this talk, I'm going to be speaking of inclusion as involving people in the creation of products and services that they themselves will use or have used, things like that. Not just having your existing team, who's based in one place or a few places, build something for other people that they themselves don't actually use. If you saw my talk here last year about accessibility, you'll know that this is one of my main mantras, involving people in the creation of what they're going to actually be using. So how do we include all of our users? I really wanted to put the word simple on this slide. It's not simple, I'm sorry, but it's there, it's crossed off. I've given you essentially 3 steps to think about including your users. And the first one might seem silly, but it's actually really important. First, you need to accept that you yourself are not actually an expert. You don't know about the experiences of someone else. I mean, you can know about them, but you don't really know what it's like to be somebody in a different place, using a different kind of device, thinking about your product in a different way as a result of their cultural contexts. Now, this doesn't mean accept as in love that you're not an expert. Like, woo, I'm an idiot, I don't know anything, this is great, it's fine. No, not like that. I mean, accept it. Understand that it's a fact and move forward with it. To that end, I am a person who is giving a talk about cross-cultural understanding and inclusion. Being a white person from the United States, my expertise is limited to my culture, right? Understand that you're not the expert and move on. But don't worry, in step 2 of including our users, we recognize that there are experts in the world. You're not one, but they're there. There's knowledge that other people have that you can gain about their experiences, and you can listen to them. And I don't know about you, but especially growing up, I was the kind of kid who had to read every book. I read the dictionary once, right? I really like learning. Yeah, fun fact for you there. I read the dictionary. I don't know why. It's exciting, especially when so many of us are in a field that has constant new things to learn and to know. I don't know, I find the idea of learning about other people's experiences to be just as exciting as learning about a new JavaScript function that's been implemented, right? There are people to listen to and things to know, and we're gonna learn it, okay? So step 3, we engage with those people who know what's going on. We engage the experts in their own culture. Lucky for you, this isn't just members of an existing culture that you would do user studies with. That's important. There exist people in the world who are cultural consultants, specifically people who not only are a member of a cultural group, but make it their work to communicate that culture to people. Perhaps read copy you've written or advise on designs, things like that, and give you feedback on what you've done. A person who isn't just a random user, but who is trained and has skills in communicating about cultural differences, which is really cool. I highly recommend, especially if you're taking on a larger project and it's really important to you, trying to find a cultural consultant from the group you're interested in. And yeah, engage these experts, listen to what they have to say. It's really the best way you can be sure to be including cross-cultural groups. Okay, I keep saying the word culture a lot, and I realize that there are certain assumptions and associations we have with that word, especially like on our lovely panel yesterday when we were talking about internationalization and globalization. We tend to think of culture perhaps as like nation states, right? Oh, the culture in China is different from the culture here. And we tend to talk about cultural groups as huge, huge monolithic groups, right? Which, fun fact, as I'm sure you all can assume, isn't the case. But generally, culture is patterns, traits, and beliefs that are the expression of a particular community. It's more than just language, it's more than just fine art. It's a way of thinking, it's a way of believing, and a way of interacting with the world that signifies your membership to a community. Now, this is the part of this talk where you take notes, because there's going to be a quiz at the end. Get ready for a sociology lesson, yeah. I want to introduce to you Trump and R's model of national cultural differences. It's a framework for cross-cultural communication. It was developed through interviews of tens of thousands of employees, specifically at IBM, in 43 different countries. This was initially created as a way to understand how to communicate in a business setting between people who are even at the same company but exist in different cultural groups. However, it can be applied far broader than that. Inside this model, there are 7 different kind of opposing pairs or maybe axes you can measure a culture on. I'm just going to talk about 4 that I think have the most impact on what we in this room do. But if you're in for some light reading, there's a lot more you can learn about this. Okay, so this first opposing cultural pair that I'd like to talk about is individualism versus communitarianism. I stumble on that word every time I say it. So this is the idea of evaluating a culture as either being about individualism, as in people regarding themselves as individuals, as people with independent thoughts, they make their decisions solely based on their own thoughts and feelings, or communitarianism, people regarding themselves as part of a group, thinking about what does the group need, what does the group want, what are the group's beliefs. There are excellent examples of lots of different countries, just in general, for all of these opposing pairs. But I debated with myself. Do I want to give you a list of like, these are the countries that are individualistic, and these are the countries that are communitarianism? Communitarianists? I don't know what the word would be, but you get the idea. And I found it really fun at first when I was researching examples for this talk to think of like, oh, that's why my friend from that place is like that, ha ha ha. But I find that giving these examples and just listing countries for you honestly oversimplifies this model and really my point. So if you want to find examples, you can go look them up. I have links in these slides. But I want to talk about this in a more broad sense, not just thinking about nations, also thinking about cultures within nations. So we're just going to talk about the general concepts. Right. So how does this impact what we do in a digital space? Both in payments, but even in a more broad sense, right? This might impact, of course, marketing copy. If we're engaging with a user in some way, we want them to make a purchase. If they are from a more individualist sort of culture, we're going to be giving them benefits as to how they relate to themselves. Good example here, yesterday I was looking at a home security system that I saw advertised on TV. And of course, I hopped on their website because they were giving out a free deal. Now, the way that that website might choose to market, okay, cool, let's see. We were talking about individualism and communitarianism, and I made a joke about how I can't pronounce the word. Okay, there we go. I know where we are. Neat, okay, cool. Let's keep moving since we're gonna run low on time. Okay, so the next of these 4 examples I wanted to give you is about specific versus diffuse cultures. I don't have the presenter remote anymore. I can't feel fancy. Well, that's fine. So this is a little harder to conceptualize than just individualistic versus communal cultures. In a specific culture, people have a large public space that they share with others. Now, this doesn't mean like a literal space. This means like an emotional space, a relationship space. They have a large public space they share with others and a private space that's closely guarded. So a good example would be, I don't know, like a college professor, right? Or me right now on this stage with you, haha, right? I have a large public space that I'm sharing with you. I'm acting friendly, I'm telling you weird facts about myself, like reading a dictionary, whatever, and I'm sharing this with you. You know my name, you kind of know what I look like, whatever, right? But I have a private space that's closely guarded. If you want to talk cool life secrets or something out in the hall, I'm going to be really weirded out and think that's kind of weird that you're asking me those questions, right? As opposed to a diffuse culture, public and private sections of someone's life are similar in size. But public spaces are honestly more closely guarded because they provide access to that public space because they're diffuse. Movement between them is easier. So how does this impact what we do in a digital space? Well, to build off of what I was speaking about on the previous slide when my laptop decided it hated me, this does sort of intersect with that individual versus community sort of aspect. So with a customer that is on your website that is from a more diffuse culture, you want to focus on building a relationship with them. And once you have that relationship, it's going to be strong because you can easily move into their private space, which is more, although not as closely guarded as it would be in a specific culture, they're able to have a stronger relationship with you and you're able to move quicker, although you have to get past, oh no. Cool. Okay. Nobody breathe. Nobody breathe near my laptop. I will walk towards the other side of the stage. Nobody think thoughts about stuff. Okay. In the sake of time, I'm actually going to skip past this section of my talk. Like I said, there's beautiful slides online. You can look at them and learn and share them with your friends and go, wow, look at all this stuff I learned about sociology at a payments conference. Whoa. Okay, cool. We're going to skip past this. There's also things about how people perceive time. Wow, that's cool. And about where people's concept of a locus of control is. Is it inside them or outside them? And it's all very cool. Where's my beautiful friend who has the time? I just want to know how off I am because of this. Okay, thank you. Hi. But we're going to skip past this. You can read about it on your own. It's very cool. There's 3 more I'm not talking about anyways. Right. In general, the purpose of these slides and the time we lost was to give you examples of different kinds of broad cultural differences. And these might seem kind of weird to think about, especially the one that's about how we perceive time. Actually, I will flip back to that so you can understand this a little bit. Sequential cultures think about events as happening in an order, as time being a line and events being discrete points in time. Whereas those that are more synchronic think of time periods as interwoven and overlapping. So customers that are from a more sequential culture are going to care a lot about deadlines, about due dates, about when a payment is going to go through. I'm thinking of Patreon yesterday and the first of the month, right? Super important. Whereas those that are more synchronic, those exact points in time aren't as important. And in fact, if they matter to you a lot, you might need to remind people of those and communicate that they are important. These deadlines and dates and points in time are important. So right, it's kind of a weirder one to think about, especially if you're not used to conceiving of time in a different way. These cultural differences that we sort of skim past have a really big impact on how somebody thinks about the world. It's more than just, oh, what should your marketing copy be on a CTA? Or how should we communicate on a form? It's about the entire experience that you're giving a user through an entire payment path. You can think of it like an accent, almost, right? We know that where somebody was raised or where they've spent a lot of time impacts how we hear them when they speak. So too does their culture impact everything about how somebody thinks, like a mental accent, if you will, right? But it's important to note that people are still individuals. Like I mentioned before about not necessarily giving specific examples of countries right now. It can be really tempting to I almost want to say, like, think of it like astrology, right? Like, oh, well, my friend's a Taurus, so he acts like this. My friend's from a synchronic culture, so that's why he's never on time when I want to hang out with him. It can be very tempting. People are still individuals, though, and to my earlier point of engaging people from a culture in your user testing, in the ideation and design of a product, you need more than just one person. One person can't represent a culture. People are individuals. Okay, cool. The other point I want to make is that culture exists on many scales. I touched on this earlier, but it's something we don't often think about. It can be easy to think about countries at a cultural level. I mean, we're already thinking about countries from a regulatory level, or what types of payments do they use in that country. World regions have a culture, but also lifestyle groups, all the way down to workplaces. And now for some of us, this might not matter as much, right? But an example of one of my clients is an insurance provider, right? And they provide insurance services to just one specific region in the Midwest. Their culture that they have, that their customers have in that state is going to be different from the culture a few states over, even if it's also within the Midwest. If your customer group that you're serving is in a specific enough area or a specific slice of the population, it's important to think about their cultural differences. Another great example, a previous client I'd had was a large performing arts organization. And unsurprisingly, due to the kind of art they were producing, most of their customers were in the 60 and above range. The designers were not in the 60 above range, and were not necessarily thinking about the culture of the people that they were producing a work for. And so we were finding that there were lots of problems getting conversions and things like that, getting tickets sold. And until we realized, wait a minute, we actually need to dive into the demographics and the culture of the people that this site is being made for, we were able to make appropriate changes. Now, that doesn't mean to say we reworked a site to only be appealing to people 60 and above, but thought about the cultures across different segments of who was using different parts of the site. And part of that process is interviewing people from that group. Now, that may seem kind of obvious, but just wait. I also want to talk about inclusion on scales that aren't just countries or languages or cultural groups like that. There are a lot of different things we can think about in the digital space that we aren't necessarily thinking about when we should be. Like I mentioned, my talk here last year on accessibility. That's not just thinking about, well, what physical limitations or mental limitations does someone have? It's also a matter of thinking of how cultural groups are different within disability communities. So too can we think about, as I mentioned on a previous slide, cultural groups that are within a larger group, a subculture, if you will. We can think about how those groups might differ even as something such as digital literacy. Within a group, how well do people know how to engage with technology? Can they perform basic functions? What's the norm in that culture for engaging with something? It might seem somewhat simple, but even just thinking of how someone who is, what's it called, Generation Z teenagers, right? How they might interact with a mobile payment versus somebody my age who is not a teenager, and how those different subcultures interact. We can also think about naming structures. Now, this is somewhat of a deep dive, which we don't quite have time for, but I have several other talks I've linked on Twitter to recommend to you. Even in how we just ask for someone's name on a payment form has a huge impact on what it communicates to them about how we perceive them and how they're communicating with us. There is excellent work done by Carly Ho in how we ask for names cross-culturally on payment forms and registration forms on the web. Often we're able to exclude entire groups of users just by breaking name fields into first name and last name, which is such a tiny little UI difference, right? And it's a relatively small difference in a database. But to somebody who is using your product who suddenly finds they can't actually type their name in correctly, makes a huge difference. Hi, hello, and welcome back to this talk that you're experiencing in microtransaction format of like 10 minutes at a time. Please give me $3 to see the rest of my talk. All right, cool. Well, what's my point with this slide? Jeez, it's boy howdy. It's hard to keep track of what I was talking about. Right, I was explaining to you different cross-cultural differences that we don't consider. I talked about names. I talked about how Carly Ho is awesome and has work on this that she does. Right, we're talking about digital literacy. Class is another major one. Often when we're thinking of designing a digital product for a specific group of people, we're not considering cultural differences within that group. The way, say, a university, right? The way that a university might choose to communicate information to students, oh boy howdy, if you're a first-generation college student like me who has no idea what's going on, doesn't really understand anything about how a college works, versus a student that is not a first-generation student who has a lot of experience, whose parents guided them through the process, the way that you communicate, even to just those students, is a huge difference. Now, this might seem kind of obvious. I almost feel silly saying some of these things, right? Like, it feels like the ultimate thesis of this talk is like, different people are different. Thanks, bye. But I hate to be so flippant about it, but if we all understood this, if all of our designers and our engineers and UX experts and project managers, if everyone in what we do understood this, then we wouldn't have a lot of problems we have of discluding users, of certain sites being inaccessible to people, being incomprehensible, being unusable just because of someone's cultural group. Clearly, we have problems, right? And often we think about, especially on our panel yesterday, we were talking about different payment methods. And specifically that little aside we had about should users, I think someone asked a question of, is more choice better for users? Should users, just be able to have a few payment methods or a lot? Is it better to confuse them, or is it better to restrict them? Both of those sound bad. And I pretty much stole my own point yesterday on that panel from my own talk. How rude, right? That really, when we give our users a cultural experience that's well suited to them, they're able to make their own choices about how they'd like to engage, which is going to lead to more conversions. It's going to lead to happier users. I gave the example on the panel as well yesterday of failures that have happened in cross-cultural understanding, in payments specifically. eBay in 1999, this is a little further back, but it's still a great example. When they decided we want to expand to Japan, they localized very, very poorly, which I guess makes sense for the year 1999. But they simply translated everything, put it out there. And then, only then, after they released, did they realize the problem? And that's not how a Japanese user wants to use a site. We're often in cultures and in linguistic groups that are easily typed. It's way easier to perform a search function on a site, for example, right? If I want to go to Amazon and I want to, I don't know, buy a cool tie, a tie-dye tie, right? I can type, have predictive type, and find what I'm looking for. It's a lot easier in my language to do that. Versus East Asian languages, the way that a character works, the way that typing works, not only is it going to be a bit more difficult to have a predictive text that it allows a user to discover, but also broader cultural differences cause a user to not necessarily want to search and find things on their own, but instead, for example, in the individualistic versus communitarian cultures, want to find out what other people are looking for. They want to find out what's popular. What did somebody else find? What are more people buying? Cool. That was a thing that wasn't my laptop, at least. Sorry, that weird beep. Oh, boy. This is a talk. Like I said, my slides are online. Oh, buddy. I'm happy my laptop has survived this long. We talked about payment methods. We talked about device type. It's more than just countries and languages. You need to be discussing things with actual users. And that's not just a matter of talking to users who might use your product. That's a matter of talking to cultural consultants, like I mentioned earlier. It's also a matter of having those people involved on your team. I know there were several talks yesterday that mentioned this concept, but having just those folks on your team from a cultural group you want to serve makes it way easier when you're building something for yourself as opposed to building something for others. Yes. Whoa, come on, it's not. Hello? Hooray! Boy, that's not as graceful as an ending as I was hoping it to be, but thank you all for this wild ride through my talk that was secretly about microtransactions and laptops not working. I appreciate you hanging out with me in this adventure through my laptop, deciding it hates me. Like I said, these slides are available online. I have a lot of juicy details that I kind of had to skip over because of this situation. But my goal here today was, lucky for me, not necessarily to give you a full exhaustive list of every possible way that you could think about people in different cultures, but instead to sort of spark the question in your mind of, oh crap, how can I better include users that I'm not looking at right now? Or going, wait a minute, why did there even have to be a talk about this? People should just know all this already. Spoiler, they don't. Talk to people on your teams, talk to people that do work with you about involving people in your work who are from the cultural groups you want to serve or you are serving right now. Again, thank you so much. My slides are online.